The base principles, the core principles of good procurement, good purchasing, we already know them, right? They're fairly stable. It's just a matter of, okay, how do we get to the next level in terms of the performance of those best practices, of getting the right user experience, to your point, right? So usually that's the types of conversations I'm having with clients. And then I'd say the other trap is to spread yourself too thin, right? So maybe, do it year by year, right? Where you say, instead of tackling all of our categories, like what are the next 2 categories that our COE, centralized procurement function, doesn't have a hold on today? And, we could get much better in the next year, right? And focus our energies on that, because we know there's really important benefits there, right? So doing like a one-off road mapping, opportunity mining exercise, and then ranking those opportunities based on effort and impact, and which one has the highest benefit.
Thanks again for joining another edition of The Never-Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement for companies running SAP. Today we have back Joël Collin-Demers, and he is a legend in his own right. If you want to stay in touch with the best of procurement, Pure Procurement's the spot. He's got a newsletter that most people got to have, and not everyone have it yet. You can fix that for yourself, though. Tell a friend. Joël, thanks so much for joining.
My pleasure. Coming hot right out of the gate. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Yeah. I know we were talking about how there's a problem out there and there's some stuff that's just not funny, right? And user experience is like a joke. If you have to explain it, it's not funny. And all of these people that have to use your procurement solutions, if we call them that, I guess, they have to interact with the policy and the process and the channels and everything else. If you have to explain it, it's not funny, and you will leave people feeling very unhappy about that. Joël, what would you add? How are you seeing some of the best, most effective folks addressing this right now?
Yeah, well, I'd say the first thing is that nobody's got it fully figured out, right? Which is like the unspoken truth, or the elephant in the room, which is, every client that I talk with, whether it's a potential client, an existing client, like we're all on this journey, and we've got to figure it out for, direct or core materials or the large portions of the spend, but not all of the spend, right? And we still have these procurement policies or these yearly trainings that we need people to follow, and they need to understand the business rules to apply them correctly, and then they don't. And we see that in the spend cubes, and we see that in the P-card spend data, and we go, okay, how do we get better next year? And so there's this continuous improvement cycle, but so nobody's got it figured out, first of all. And then the second one is, to your point, if you have to train people, I think you use the term like forever a novice, or the
perpetual novice.
Yeah,
that's the persona for our intake and orchestration solution. Yeah. Is they are a perpetual novice. They don't have a clue what a channel strategy is. They don't know. They don't care. They never will. They're too busy. Their inbox is overflowing. And if you emailed them the latest procurement policy with the highlights and the 6 bullet points about it, chances are they're going to delete it unread anyway.
Yeah, it's still too complicated, right? And
yeah.
And who can blame them? I mean, we're constantly taxed by more notifications, more asks, right? It's not just in procurement where we're being asked for innovation, for risk management, for diversity, for savings on top of savings on top of savings, right? Like it's the same thing whether you're in maintenance and production and accounting and finance and sales, etc. And so, so to your point, right? I think it's always going back to basics and telling yourself, okay, how do we make this as easy as possible for the people who need to interact with procurement processes, whether that be sourcing, new contract, putting an NDA in place, or straight up buying something in the day-to-day operations.
Yeah. If you have to explain it, it's not funny. And if those people interacting with your procurement solutions and systems and channels and processes come out the other end without a smile, it wasn't funny. And it's probably way more expensive than it should have been. So that's one of those beautiful opportunities. And it's that movement from like the one behemoth that in theory did everything, but I've never met one of those unicorns. I've heard about them, but only in marketing brochures. So then how do you start to weave these things together? And I know you were talking about this in the context of how you see that orchestration being a really critical ingredient in bringing these things together. Can you share more about that?
Sure. So we've had orchestration solutions for a long time, right? Even longer on the technical side, right? So when you think of middleware, that is an orchestration solution, right? It orchestrates like a trigger with a certain format, and we transform it and we load it into another system, right? And we can also do the same back and forth between systems to support a business process, right? And I see process orchestration as just being an extension of that, which is we bring the business and business process management principles into that middle layer, right, between our different applications. And we start with the business process, right, and we design it, and then we fit the applications into where they need to be within that process, instead of saying, oh, I'm going to buy a sourcing application, a contract management application, and then I'm going to try to figure out how I link them together, right, or with the different data objects or the different transactional parts of the process that need to talk to each other. So it's a subtle nuance, a subtle shift in how you need to think about your system architecture, but to me it's a fundamental paradigm shift that it enables, right? And when you're able to do that, right, to use a process orchestration layer, which, think of it just as your Visio, right, that you've been designing for the last 15, 20 years, but making it executable, right? So that once somebody hits that trigger at the beginning of your process, they're just guided through the process based on how they're interacting with that process, right? Whether it be with a chatbot, whether it be with a web form, however you're gathering the info, the responses will help you navigate the user down a decision tree and then interact with the processes and the systems that support those processes at the correct point in the process. So that's how I think about orchestration. And then, the tough part of implementing those types of technologies is not necessarily the technology itself, although it's a prerequisite, but it's the business logic, the business rules, the business processes, having a really deep understanding of your categories and how it relates with those processes and rules.
What I love about that is this concept that we describe as the perpetual novice needs to get it right. And it needs to be so easy they can't get it wrong. And it's a high bar. And the crux, just as you said, is it holds their hand through, here are the next things. And there's an element of managing expectations for how many steps remain and how long it's going to take. Yep. And organizations do that a little bit differently, but making it really fast and easy to set that up as the wizards, so important. When you think about how that kind of fabric gets woven together, you described it as like a beautiful blanket. And there's a lot of people that are trying to stay warm with a blanket full of holes.
Yep.
And I think some of the biggest, most important holes can get filled way faster than they used to be. What are you seeing people win with there?
Yeah, so if you don't know where to start with process orchestration, right? To me, it goes back to, and I'm doing this with a client right now where, set up your intranet correctly, right? And what I mean by that is make it user-centric, right? And so user comes on the intranet page, and why does a user come to your procurement intranet page? They have a project to source. They want to buy something. They have an issue with an order. They have an issue with an invoice. They want to get training, right? So what is those 4 or 5 core actions, right? And then build your intranet hierarchy based on top of those actions, right? And so if I want to buy something, what's the next step is, well, what do you want to buy, right? And then so here are direct commodities in our purchasing profile, everything you can buy within the company. Here's the most common things, right? Your raw materials, your production supplies, and then you have the indirect as well, your office supplies, your fleet management, you want to do travel and expense, you want to hire a consultant, etc., right? So I have all that logic, which are my commodities, and then when I click into those, well, here's the purchasing channel, right? You go into your SAP system, you use non-stock purchase order, and you link it with your training documentation, your whether they're PowerPoints, whether they're U-Perform documents for those of you who are in the SAP world and still using that, or your Word procedures, right? Standard operating procedures, right? So link the user to the content. You can do that today, right? And then process orchestration, where it comes in, you already done all the hard work, which is documenting that, right? And so process orchestration, you sit it on top of this type of content and you build out the process flows according to that content, and then you're able to say, okay, well, I've got an AI front door, right? Instead of coming to the intranet, just come and chat with our procurement chatbot, right? And the chatbot has the knowledge of the back-end processes that you've modeled within the tool, and is able to say, to discover that intent, right? To say, what do you want to buy? I want to buy a fridge. Okay, well, listen, a fridge is it's a tailspin thing. We don't have a contract for that. We don't have a catalog for that. So we're just going to route you down this exception scenario, right? Whereas I want to buy production supplies. Okay, well, production supplies, and then are they in stock or are they non-stock, right? If they're in stock, you don't have to buy anything. Like you just route them to doing a goods issue. You could get as granular as that, right? With process orchestration, because you plug it into the back-end SAP system or the Ariba
here's
system.
where you have some of that available right now. We don't have to order anything. It'll automatically replenish itself in a while.
That's right. The limit is your imagination, essentially, because it's connecting to the APIs of the systems you already own, right? You're just layering process logic and business rules over top of that, and then guiding the user and asking them for the information that they need, that you need at each step of the process based on that context that's very specific to their purchasing intent. So that's a long rambling answer, but I hope it gives you like a kind of a progression chart to, I don't have anything today, like build out your logic, your business rules, like your purchasing channels. And then when you eventually want to automate that, you've done all the hard work already, right?
Yeah. If you can't explain your channels to somebody that needs to buy something and how they would pick the right one, it's not clear and simple enough. And
it means you don't understand it, quite frankly.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I love it. So, Joel, when you're putting out your weekly newsletter, there's some topics that come back fairly often. And I think both of us have noticed that there's hunger for what maybe to either of us that have been in and around into procurement for so long, it seems like it's kind of the easy to basic stuff. And there's often this sense of, even if the organization isn't Canadian, they're probably apologizing a little bit for not being more mature, or they feel like everyone else is mature. But that's just kind of like social media, right? Everybody looks like they're up here, but really, they're a lot closer to where you are. And because they present the best that's out there, and like both of us have things that aren't perfect in our businesses, but when organizations are showing up and they're feeling bad because they didn't have the best of the best already implemented, how are you having those conversations to help people, number one, bring some empathy to help them feel better, and number two, help them hone in on like, well, here's some of the basics it's just real important to have some of these basics right. And I think the channel strategy, making that easy for somebody to understand the channels and then find the right one, that's one. What else would you say is maybe your top one or two things that you see that there's a hunger out there for people to get some of these basics in place?
Yeah, and I think, you make a good point. To me, the illustration of that is like, it's the same behavior we had in primary and secondary school, where you're sitting in a class and you have a question, right? Like somebody said something, you have a question, and nobody raises their hand, and you're going like, am I the only one with this question? And I was always the kid that was like, screw this, man, I'm going to ask my question, right? So that's probably why I ended up like doing what I'm doing. But it's the same dynamic, just with different corporations, right? Everybody's, it's you could go on stage with a conference, but only 2 years after your project's been successful and like everything's been stamped and certified, right? And so you're missing a lot of opportunity to have conversations around, where folks are at, like the good, the bad, and the ugly, and how you can learn from that and integrate it directly into your projects or your initiatives right now, right? So I'd say like, we think everybody's much more mature in their procurement processes than they are, and I would say this worldwide, right? Not just Canada. That being said, a lot of organizations are very mature in specific categories, specific types of processes, right? Whether it be service procurement or raw materials or inventory management for certain types of goods, right? Like different industries have different strengths and weaknesses, and so being able to cross-pollinate is great, right? Because it means the answers for high maturity in all your categories is out there already. And the tech is getting better and better. So the answer is always slightly changing a bit, but that's the other thing I'd say is like the base principles, the core principles of good procurement, good purchasing, like we already know them, right? They're fairly stable. It's just a matter of, okay, how do we get to the next level in terms of the performance of those best practices, of getting the right user experience, to your point, right? So usually that's the types of conversations I'm having with clients. And then I'd say the other trap is to spread yourself too thin, right? So maybe, do it year by year, right? Where you say, instead of tackling all of our categories, like what are the next 2 categories that our COE, or centralized procurement function, doesn't have a hold on today? And, we could get much better in the next year, right? And focus our energies on that, because we know there's really important benefits there, right? So doing like a one-off road mapping, opportunity mining exercise, and then ranking those opportunities based on effort and impact, and which one has the highest benefit and doesn't paint you in a corner in terms of, things that you're not going to be able to do later on. So that's more from an IT standpoint and applications, but doing that and then investing in a few core initiatives and ignoring completely the other ones, right, for as long as you can, is also another piece of advice, right? Because otherwise you spread yourself too thin and you're moving the ball a little bit on 12 initiatives at the same time, and you're never getting to full maturity on this new capability that you're trying to develop.
Yeah, I love bringing that back to the idea of focus, right? Follow one course until successful. And that means that you do a good job, not perfect, never let the perfect stand in the way of the good, but a good job, and then take that same thing to other channels and that same research. I love the idea. Like, automotive has had maturity with this concept of evaluated receipt settlement. I still think of that as like one of my favorite best kept secrets out there. And even if your jurisdiction doesn't technically allow you to use ERS to the letter, you can still take advantage of key parts of it, simulate the invoice, go get it stamped, certified, whatever, bring it back, and then post it. And then, hey, a three-way matched.
That's right.
So good. Joël, I really appreciate you. I love the way that you show up with the newsletter all the time, because that consistency, not just the motivation to go do something once in a while, but, and this thing that comes out on every Thursday. So huge respect for you. I know it's a big investment of time and energy, and you're growing quite the following. So anybody that hasn't subscribed to Joël's newsletter, please get out, check that out. Pure Procurement. You can easily find it. And Joël, thanks again for joining. And this has been another edition of the Never Ending Climb for stronger procurement, stronger supply chain for companies running SAP. See you again next week.